Welcome to Oakham, the county town of England's smallest historic county, Rutland. In fact, Oakham, alongside Uppingham a few miles to the south, is one of only 2 towns in this entire county, and as the largest and most historically significant of the two, it's home to a wealth of heritage that showcases the tale of this anomalous part of the country. On this walk around Oakham, we'll dive into the history of the town and the county that surrounds it, and we begin at perhaps the most important site in all of Rutland, Oakham Castle. Oakham Castle, which was built between the years 1180 and 1190, wasn't necessarily a castle as we typically think of it, rather a large fortified manor house, with the Great Hall that we can see here standing as a finely preserved example of the kind of domestic buildings of England's Norman era. While the outline of the old castle walls can still be seen today, the Great Hall is the most prominent survivor of this more than 800-year-old residence, in front of which there stands an iron sculpture of a horseshoe, the symbol of the county of Rutland. Horseshoes, which appear on the county flag and many other local emblems, are symbolic of Rutland, owing to a unique tradition that has taken place here at Oakham Castle for centuries. As we venture inside the historic Great Hall, you'll notice that its walls are entirely decked out with horseshoes galore, each with their own intriguing story. But what on earth is going on here? Were the residents of Oakham Castle simply horseshoe hoarders, or was there some method to all of this? Well, according to tradition here at Oakham Castle, any peer of the realm or any member of royalty must present the Lord of the Manor of Oakham with a horseshoe on their first visit to the castle here. Having existed for centuries, there are today more than 230 horseshoes that hang on the walls of Oakham Castle, which have been presented to the Lord of the Manor by everybody from lords and ladies to princes and princesses, and even kings and queens. The oldest horseshoe in Oakham Castle's collection is more than 550 years old, presented to the Lord of the Manor by none other than King Edward IV in the year 1470, who gifted it to Oakham Castle in the aftermath of his victory at the nearby Battle of Losecoat Field during the Wars of the Roses. More than half a millennium later, Oakham Castle is still being gifted with horseshoes, its collection housing horseshoes presented by the likes of Queen Elizabeth II, and its most recent horseshoe dating from as recently as 2014, gifted by Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. I must quickly say thank you to the lovely people at Oakham Castle for letting me film inside and showing me around the riveting Great Hall. But as we now make our way outside once again, we still haven't quite got to the bottom of the horseshoe tradition. For instance, why horseshoes? Well, this castle was built over 800 years ago by one of the first lords of the Manor of Oakham, a man called Walkelin de Ferrers. Walkelin was a member of the significant Norman-era de Ferrers family, who arrived in England with William the Conqueror in 1066, and their family name has the rough meaning of a farrier, or one who worked with horseshoes. As such, horseshoes became the symbol of the de Ferrers family, who used them to adorn the walls of the Great Hall at the heart of this historic and beautifully preserved medieval castle. Here we can see a depiction of how the castle may have once appeared, with mighty stone walls and a moat added to the castle around the year 1340, as its owners sought to tighten their grip on authority in the local region. Of course, Oakham Castle was originally built by the Normans after their invasion of England to keep the local population under control, although in the last few centuries, the castle's use has shifted towards being used as both Oakham's most popular visitor attraction, and occasionally the site of council meetings and a crown court, which has actually been held at the castle every 2 years since 1229. Here, though, we're now making our way out of the grounds of Oakham Castle through its historic gateway, which likely dates from the early 17th century. The approach to the castle and its gateway is by way of this narrow lane, simply known as Castle Lane, a fetching little street that links the historic manor house with the town's marketplace. The marketplace is the historic centre of Oakham, which grew up on the peripheries of the castle. Markets have been held here on the marketplace since at least the year 1249, and they continue in earnest to this day more than 700 years on. Now of course, as the most significant settlement in Rutland, traders from all over the county would flock to Oakham's marketplace, bringing wealth to the town not only through the buying and selling of goods, but also entreating those who stayed for more than just commerce. On the edge of the marketplace here, we can see a pub known as the Whipper Inn, formerly known as the George, and which is an old coaching inn of the 18th century that provided a place to stay, eat or drink for people who had travelled far to Oakham. The marketplace today is home to an interesting collection of landmarks, from old coaching inns to an imposing 19th century townhouse that we're passing here, and at the foot of which you'll also find an interesting relic in the form of Oakham's old town pump. Situated centrally in the town to provide easy access to drinking water for as many people as possible, Oakham's pump was likely erected back in the 19th century, drawing cleaner water from local streams and rivers. As you may know, Oakham and Rutland have an important link with water in the modern day, with the county home to the largest reservoir in England, Rutland Water, which lies just to the east of Oakham here, and was built in the 1970s to provide water to the wider East Midlands, which, as you can see from this map, is where you'll find Oakham, situated about 25 miles from the cities of Leicester and Peterborough on opposite sides. Now just beside the marketplace, we're looking up at one of the most prominent landmarks in central Oakham today, the prestigious Oakham School, which was founded in the town all the way back in 1584. The grand buildings here in the town centre are just one part of the school, which actually started out life as a single classroom in the parish churchyard, which we'll visit in a short while. In front of the school buildings here, meanwhile, there stands Oakham's distinctive Buttercross, so named as it was the place where dairy products were sold at the town's markets. Likely built in the early 17th century, the Buttercross was also often a site of religious preaching and probably public punishments, with a set of stocks situated on the ground beside the main column at the heart of the Buttercross, although mysteriously, the stocks have 5 holes rather than the typical 3 for a person's head and 2 arms. As strange as this may seem, a possible reason for the 5-hole stocks in Oakham is that they were used to detain more than one person at a time, with a single leg of various ne'er-do-wells clamped alongside one another. Having made our way off the marketplace now, we find ourselves standing before Oakham's mighty parish church, All Saints. Thought to be around 800 years old at its oldest, All Saints is by far and away the tallest building in Oakham, its towering spire dating from the 14th century, and said to be visible from most of the surrounding countryside on the outskirts of Rutland's county town. The expansive churchyard occupies a significant area beside Oakham Castle, from which we saw the spire of All Saints at the start of our walk, but there are a number of other notable buildings to be found surrounding the church. Behind the walls to our left and just opposite the parish church, there stands the imposing chapel of Oakham School, built in 1924 as a memorial to the school's former students, known as Old Oakhamians, who died in the First World War. The chapel, the host of regular services attended by school students, is situated in what is today the heart of Oakham School, although the school's buildings can be found all over town, primarily to the north of where we are now. Also, as we mentioned, the original 16th century classroom of Oakham School can be found on the other side of All Saints Church here, and we'll make our way around the churchyard towards that point of genesis for the school now. Now this area of Oakham, with spectacular architecture including the school chapel and the impressive All Saints Church, is one of the most delightful parts of the rather large town centre. In fact, for a town of just over 10,000 people today, Oakham is a surprisingly spread out town, but one of the main reasons for this is that a significant portion of central Oakham is taken up with wide open grounds that were once a part of Oakham Castle. For a long time, when the castle was occupied by the de Ferrers family, this now leafy area surrounding the churchyard was actually a part of the castle's outer bailey, home to gardens, exquisite ponds, and more, all of which occupied a major footprint that dominated the medieval town of Oakham. Today though, as well as the churchyard, the area surrounding Oakham Castle's inner bailey and the Great Hall has been converted into the spacious Cuts Close Park, the largest in town, and which we can see just up in front of us. We'll get another look at Cuts Close Park in a few moments, but here we've made our way around All Saints' Church to find the original building of Oakham School, a historic 16th century classroom nestled away under the shadow of the church and its surrounding trees. Known simply as the Old School, this building served as the only classroom of Oakham School from its founding in 1584 for around 300 years, by which time Oakham School had dwindled dramatically in size, with just 4 boys enrolled on its register in the year 1875. For those 3 centuries, all lessons were taught inside the one room inside this building. But why was this pocket-sized school founded in the first place? Well, it was in 1584 that a man named Robert Johnson, the Archdeacon of Leicester, decided to establish a free grammar school in Oakham and in nearby Uppingham, to teach local boys Hebrew, Greek and Latin, with the old school here bearing an inscription in those very languages above the main door. Inside, meanwhile, the old school is home to an array of gorgeous frescoes, but it no longer serves as a teaching room for Oakham School, last used for lessons in the late 1960s, when it was converted into Oakham's Shakespeare Centre, still used for theatrical performances to this day. Of course, today, Oakham School has expanded far beyond the capacity of its original classroom, but unlike many of England's oldest schools, this development has actually been fairly recent. As we mentioned, there were just 4 boys enrolled at Oakham School as recently as 1875, and although pupil numbers briefly rose above 100 around the end of the 19th century, they again fell away to double digits. It was only after 1910 that Oakham School began to really grow in size, as it became in effect the grammar school for all the boys of the county of Rutland, gaining over 700 pupils by the late 1960s. In 1971, meanwhile, Oakham School became one of England's first independent schools to accept girls alongside boys, and over the last 5 decades, the school has continued to grow in size, with a wealth of teaching buildings all over the town, serving the more than 1,000 pupils studying in the town today. Having now made our way away from the old school and Cuts Close Park, we find ourselves on Church Street, of course named for the towering parish church that stands just beside us here. Now, before the spectacular building that exists today, it's thought that a smaller wooden chapel had existed on the same site in Oakham, possibly even before 1066 and the Norman invasion of England, but it was replaced by All Saints in the 13th century, which grew into its impressive current form over the following centuries. Just opposite the church here on Northgate, meanwhile, we're passing by a 17th century town pub named the Wheatsheaf, which is as cosy inside as it looks on the outside. Like many other pubs of the same name around the country, the Wheatsheaf points to the history of agriculture and the production of wheat in the local area. But it's far from the only pub in town, with Oakham famed for its history of brewing and hostelry. Later on, when we make our way down the high street towards the western edge of town, we'll pass by a row of historic inns on our way to the Grain Store Brewery, a popular modern brew pub that's recognised as one of Britain's best. We'll end our walk there by the railway line in around 15 minutes' time, but there's a lot more of Oakham to see in the meantime. Just to our right, for instance, we're whizzing past a small lane with roadworks that's today known as Dean Street, but which is historically said to have been known by the rather more morbid name, Dead Man's Lane. The reason for this was that the street was typically the route along which coffins would be carried from Oakham's residential area towards the parish church, although Dead Man's Lane eventually became Dean Street, named after the Dean of Westminster Abbey who once owned land in this part of Oakham. A little further down Church Street, we're passing by a modest thatched roof cottage neighboured by a rather more grand and modern building that today hosts a cafe. On the whole, Oakham's town centre has an impressive range of architecture, not only the beautifully preserved Great Hall of the castle, but also a number of eye-catching houses, pubs and halls that line the town's high street, a busy route that runs east to west through the heart of Oakham. For a long time, Oakham's High Street was an important thoroughfare for people traversing England's East Midlands, and as such, many major establishments arose alongside it over the years, one of the more recent being the imposing Victoria Hall here, founded in 1858 under the name the Agricultural Hall, and used as the main meeting hall for Rutland's significant farming community. Later on in its history, meanwhile, The hall was used for balls and other events for the townspeople throughout the early 20th century, while it's also been a site of meetings by the Freemasons since 1869. Victoria Hall is one of many grand 19th century buildings that you'll find here in Oakham, built after the railways arrived in the town in 1848 and made access to Oakham easier for those from the surrounding region. But just along the high street here, we can see a grand medieval townhouse that's thought to have been built around 700 years ago, in the 13th or 14th century. Known as Flore's House, this is thought to be the oldest residence in Oakham outside the walls of the castle, and it was named after one Sir William Flore, who was involved in the development of Oakham Castle and once served as the Sheriff of Rutland too, while his son Roger Flore went on to serve as an MP for Rutland and the Speaker of the House of Commons in the early 15th century. Just next door to Flore's house, meanwhile, we can see Oakham's eye-catching Congregational Church, whose grounds we'll walk through to make our way to South Street. Now, the Congregational Church here was built on the High Street back in 1861, although the town's congregational community has a much longer history, established all the way back in 1662. As well as the imposing Church of England parish church of All Saints, you'll find places of worship of varying denominations all over Oakham, with the historic Congregational Church just one of a number of fetching 19th century chapels to be found on the town's streets. But as we now make our way away from the church and towards South Street, we'll find ourselves in a rather more residential area, where a number of Oakham's 10,000 plus citizens live. Though it may not sound like much, Oakham's population accounts for roughly a quarter of all the people living in the county of Rutland today. So why on earth did this tiny county come into being in the first place? Measuring no more than 18 miles wide at its greatest extent, Rutland, as you can see from this map, is sandwiched between the counties of Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, and Northamptonshire. Now, the creation of the county of Rutland appears to have come about merely by circumstance just over 800 years ago, although at that point in the medieval era, there are conflicting reports as to whether it was a separate county, or perhaps simply an exclave or a detached part of Nottinghamshire. Or maybe it was a soak, not quite a county, but certainly an area with a degree of independent jurisdiction. Rutland's ambiguous county status in its early years wasn't exactly crucial to its existence, as a sparsely populated area consisting mostly of cattle farms. But for whatever reason, the Rutland name gradually became an identity for the people of Oakham, Uppingham, and the many villages in this part of the countryside, establishing itself as one of England's historic counties until just under 50 years ago. Then, the county of Rutland ceased to exist for the first time in centuries, as it became a district of the county of Leicestershire in 1974, although this caused outrage among the people of Rutland, who were finally restored their county status in 1997. As such, the current county of Rutland is actually only 25 years old, but it's still home to a wealth of history, and here on Oakham's South Street, we're currently looking towards the town's historic Quaker Friends Meeting House, built in 1719. Yet another of the many places of worship to be found in Oakham's varied town centre, the Friends Meeting House is the second oldest religious building in town after All Saints Church, playing host to a community that has existed in Oakham for around 400 years. The Friends Meeting House today stands here at the junction between the mostly residential South Street and the now pedestrianised Jail Street. Now, the name for this street of course relates to a historic jail that existed here in Oakham, although rather than being situated in this area of town, the jail actually stood within the bailey of Oakham Castle until the 15th century, and this small lane led from the south side of town towards the jail, which served as the jail for the entire county of Rutland. As you may remember, we mentioned earlier that the Great Hall of Oakham Castle has been in use as a courthouse since the year 1229, one of the reasons that the historic building has been restored and survived such a long period of time. But there's no longer a jail to be found in the town centre, with Rutland's main prison located near the village of Stretton in the northeast of the county. As we've seen along the street, Jail Street is home to a mix of mostly modern but stylistically different buildings, as is the rest of Oakham's town centre, as we walk out onto the high street once again. From here, we'll make our way out of the heart of town towards the western edge of Oakham, the site of the railway station and the brew pub where we'll be ending our walk. But as we promised, we'll be passing by a slew of inns on the way. The first being this, the Admiral Hornblower, which was originally built in the 17th century as a farmhouse, but today stands as a much-loved town centre restaurant and hotel. Sharing its name with the character of the eponymous novels by C.S. Forester, the Admiral Hornblower is just one of many inns that stand on Oakham's busy high street, many of which were initially built as a place for travellers to stop and rest on long journeys to or through this town, much like the Whipper Inn that we saw back on the marketplace. Just opposite us here, meanwhile, is a rather lovely restaurant known as the Dovetail, one of many restaurants to be found in Oakham, a town that's often touted as one of England's gourmet capitals, surrounded by a wealth of farmland from which fresh food is brought in. The Dovetail restaurant, meanwhile, stands just beside another of Oakham's high street pubs, the Captain Noel Newton. This pub is named after a First World War era army captain, Noel Newton, who later owned the building that stood on the site. In the 1940s, the building was bought from Newton and converted into a branch of the Royal British Legion, established to care for war veterans and their families. The Royal British Legion remained on the site of the Captain Noel Newton pub for around 60 years, until the building was eventually converted into the busy tavern that we know today. Now inside the Captain Noel Newton, you'll find a number of placards that detail more about the building's links with the Royal British Legion, as well as a number of the many other interesting stories to be explored here in Oakham. One notable tale being that of Geoffrey Hudson, a man who was often called the smallest man in the smallest county in England. We'll talk more about Geoffrey Hudson when we pass by his thatched roof house in a few moments, but as we continue down the high street, you'll notice that Oakham today is home to many of the trappings of a typical English market town: petrol stations, chain supermarkets and more. But this town is also proud to call itself a bit of a rural haven. Walking through the town centre today, we're merely seeing a snapshot of all that Oakham has to offer, and beyond its busy main streets, the town is filled with greenery on every corner, with idyllic walking routes just on the edge of the town centre that will quickly bring you into the heart of the countryside, and which can also take you towards Rutland Water. Rutland Water may be England's largest reservoir by surface area, but this county is a place mostly renowned for its small size. And here, we're standing opposite the house once lived in by Geoffrey Hudson, the so-called smallest man in England's smallest county. Born in Oakham in 1619, Hudson was a dwarf who spent much of his life considered by England's upper classes as a wonder, said to have grown to a maximum height of 3 foot 8 inches, or 114 centimetres. Coming from a humble background, Hudson made his way to living in the English royal court, after he was, at the age of just 7, presented to Queen Henrietta Maria, the wife of King Charles I, during a lavish banquet in which he was fitted into a pie, and emerged before the Queen in a miniature suit of armour. For the rest of his childhood, Geoffrey Hudson remained in the Queen's court, but his life was far from uneventful. After having spent almost all of his life being treated as a bit of a joke in the Queen's court, Hudson eventually came to the end of his tether around the year 1644, at which point he disappeared from the royal sphere without a trace, next heard from after he was captured by Ottoman pirates and taken to North Africa as a slave, where he toiled for 25 years. Hudson eventually made it back to England at the age of 50, returning to live here in Oakham for about 7 years, though his misfortune continued later on in life, imprisoned for years for his religious beliefs during a period of suppression of Catholics, and he eventually died in 1682 at the age of 63, bringing to an end a dramatic life for a little man. Now here, we're standing beside the railway line as it enters Oakham, looking towards a historic signal box built in 1899, which you may well have seen before, even if you haven't visited this town. Oakham's classically styled signal box was the model for the signal box toy kit produced by model makers Airfix, while it also featured on the boxes for train sets produced by model railway makers Hornby. After watching this video, take a look up in the loft or in one of your cupboards for an old Hornby or Airfix set. You might just see Oakham's signal box right before your eyes. Of course, as well as the signal box, Oakham's footbridge that we just saw, and its station buildings are also fetching examples of Britain's golden age of the railways. As we mentioned earlier, the railways arrived into Oakham in 1848, the line and station beside us built by the Midland Counties Railway Company to connect Peterborough and a station near Leicester. The station today still operates on that very same line, although it now extends all the way to Birmingham and Cambridge to the west and east, while trains to Corby and Kettering to the south now also depart from here. Situated in the county town of England's smallest county, Oakham Railway Station is the only passenger station in all of Rutland, although until the Beeching Acts of the 1960s, there were once a range of stations that served small villages all over the county. As you'd expect, that makes Rutland the county with the fewest stations in England, and by virtue of being the only station in the county, Oakham here is both the most and least used station in Rutland. It is an important gateway in and out of this historic town, however, and if you do live in the East Midlands, I hope you'll agree from all that we've seen on this walk that Oakham is a place well worth visiting, with the many historic buildings of its town centre complemented by lush countryside on its doorstep. Of course, after all that walking, you'll want to sit down in one of the town's restaurants or pubs, and in recent years a new must-visit in that regard has emerged in Oakham. Just beside the station here, we find the Grain Store Brewery, founded in 1995 and which makes use of a formerly derelict railway building of the Victorian era. Nearly 30 years after it was established, the Grain Store Brewery regularly finds itself listed among the best places to stop for a drink in Oakham, with a range of traditional English ales brewed in-house. You can even take tours around the brewery itself to see the process in action, or simply stop by for a drink or to enjoy one of the many music events that the brewery puts on for its punters. One of the very best spots in the famously gourmet town of Oakham, the Grain Store Brewery may be a relatively new fixture in the town, but it's yet another fantastic place to visit in Rutland's thoroughly fascinating county town. Sadly, however, we've now reached the end of our walk around Oakham. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to visiting Oakham and the county of Rutland for yourself sometime soon.